Good evening, everyone. As people are coming in, I want to thank you for joining us in a different time zone, perhaps. It is 8 o'clock here in the UK, which is, I think, a normal time to start a good discussion on solidarity and freedom and politics. But perhaps a bit later for some of you and a bit later for some of our excellent panelists. I see the room, so-called, is filling up slowly, but we're not going to waste much time to wait for attendees. They can catch up with the discussion as and when. My name is Elena Ivanova. I am part of the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign based in the UK. I'm also Bulgarian, and I have a deep interest in what is happening in Ukraine. Tonight we are going to hear from an excellent panel of speakers, of philosophers and cultural thinkers. I'm also joined by Yulia Yurchenko, also from the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign and Greenwich University, who will be helping moderate the event and the discussion. We will shortly turn to our panelists, but I wanted to give the floor to Chris Ford from Ukraine Solidarity Campaign to say a few words at the beginning about a dear friend of the campaign and of Ukraine that we sadly lost this week.
Thank you, Elena. Thank you to the panel. As many of you may know or may not at this point, but at the weekend we lost our comrade and friend Marko Boytsun, who passed away on Saturday. Marko was a founder of the campaign, but also was an activist and a scholar and a campaigner for the Ukrainian cause, and also for independent trade unions and freedom in East Europe since the late 60s. Marko's parents were Ukrainian, and he was born in Australia and grew up in Canada. He also lived in Scotland and in England. And in the 70s, Marko was among a generation of the New Left who rediscovered the Ukrainian socialist traditions and reconnected with the survivors of Stalinism and Stalin's crimes who had made it to the West. And in their own way, they ensured the survival of the Ukrainian socialist traditions, which had been in existence since the 19th century and had been persecuted so much. In that period of the 70s and early 80s, when I first met Marko, they were publishing this journal, Dialogue, which was smuggled to Ukraine and East Europe, and an English language journal, Meta, which was a rich source of information on the East, and also the translation and republication of many historical Ukrainian texts, which would have been unknown to Western audiences until that time. Marko recently has published a number of books which are extremely valuable in terms of the current situation of the Russian imperialist aggression against Ukraine. One was his book, Towards the Political Economy of Ukraine, which is currently available. And also of importance was it was based on his original PhD thesis. It took him nearly 30 years to finally publish this fantastic book, The Working Class and the National Question in Ukraine, in the era of the 1917-1918 revolution. And this book is also available in Ukrainian to be read. And we would highly recommend these. And it's available in a cheaper paperback form now from Haymarket. Marko was a dedicated to the cause of freedom of Ukraine, and also an activist in our own labor movement in this country too. Shortly before he died, I did discuss with him his work and how it related today. And one point he did make, which I think was very relevant to the current situation, is that he really believed that despite Putin's efforts to destroy Ukraine at present, that the revolution of 1917, the rebirth of the Ukrainian nation, was in fact now being realized through the historical process in the current moment in reaction to which Putin is doing. So the hope is, and the realization now is that far from Ukraine being destroyed, it's being reborn in this process. So I want to just conclude by saying that we'll publish our obituaries to Marco on our website. We invite his friends and comrades also to contribute. Vishne Yomo Pamiata.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for reminding us of Marco's legacy that is perhaps more important than ever right now, and is going to be appreciated in a different light given the current situation in Ukraine, which is also what we're here to talk about in a way. I'm going to briefly mention our panelists, and then quickly we'll go into the first contribution of the evening. So we have with us today Anton Tarasyuk from Kyiv, who is a philosopher and started Philosophers for Ukraine, a very important initiative that in a way brought us together tonight. We have YULIYA BENTIA from Krytyka, an intellectual magazine and a publishing house, also based in Kyiv. She's the editor of Krytyka. We have our OLGA BRYUKHOVETSKA from University of Kyiv-Mohyla, and she's a cultural studies lecturer and a scholar. And we have SLAVOJ ŽIŽEK, an author, a theorist, a cultural theorist, a philosopher, a celebrity philosopher, as he has been called. And he will, in fact, be the first person to speak tonight. I am going to try and be as strict with the timings as you asked me to be, Slavoj, but also Slavoj wanted to take questions right after his contribution. So if you have questions as he's speaking, or indeed if you have thought of any questions for Slavoj before tonight, use the chat function, use the Q&A function to ask them, and we will filter them through to Slavoj as soon as he's done speaking. So over to you.
Thank you very much. I cannot emphasize enough how honored I am to be here with you, philosophers. You know why? Because did you notice this? When there is a horrible crisis going on, like in Ukraine, the typical Western intellectual stance is we deeply sympathize with you, but somehow the presumption is we know, but we know better than you what is going on at your place, you know. I remember in 1992, the war in post-Yugoslavia, Sarajevo and so on, I visited London, and my friends, I broke with them now, from New Left Review, taught me everything. They told me, you don't know, but this is really happening. And I think it's very important that you don't allow any kind of arrogant Western, especially leftists, to colonize you philosophically or ideologically. So I will just give some modest remarks about what really depresses me today, apropos Ukraine. It is that a strong part of the Western left is more or less openly or under the mask of neutrality showing understanding for or even supporting Russia. The reaction of the left bears witness to its ethical and political bankruptcy. How did we come to this? We live in an era of what I call unholy alliances, a combination of ideological elements which violate the standard opposition of left and right. An extreme example. At the end of February 2023, now 2 weeks ago, the Parliament of Uganda in Africa debated a further toughening of the anti-gay, anti-homosexual law. The most radical proponents demanded death penalty for those caught in a homosexual act. Anita Among, Speaker of the Parliament, said in the debate, quote, "You are either with us or you are with the Western world," end of quote. So feminist, gay, trans struggles were denounced as an instrument of Western ideological colonialism used to undermine African identity. And this immediately brings us to another unholy alliance. Russia, with its orthodox fundamentalism, presents itself as an ally of the third world nations fighting colonialism, a fact that doesn't prevent parts of the Western left to lean towards Russia. When Sarah Wagenknecht, the most popular representative of Die Linke, the leftist party in Germany, organized a meeting for peace in Dresden in February, less than a month ago, calling for the end of helping Ukraine with arms. Björn Höcke, one of the leading members of the extreme right Alternative for Germany, who was present at the meeting, shouted at her, "Ich bitte Sie, kommen Sie zu uns. Please come to us," calling her to change her party affiliation. And the public applauded. These and other cases brought many social analysts to the wrong, I think, conclusion that today the opposition between left and right is irrelevant. One of the causes of this is that, did you notice this? The leftist analysts, they always prefer what I call a symptomal reading of an ideology. Things are not what they claim to be. Their truth is the opposite. For example, the old Marxist claims freedom in the market is the form of exploitation and domination. Universal human rights are a mask of imperialist, brutal domination, and so on. So what does the left do when it confronts a reactionary agent, which is what it claims to be, like Russia today, where there is no need for deep symptomal analysis? In Russia today, you don't have to do an exquisite symptomal reading to find the fascist roots. Look at the ultra point of reference of Putin, Ivan Ilyin, who coined the term in the 1920s, Russian fascism, who is the main reference of Dugin and so on. Here, the left gets perplexed. What if at some deeper level, we are even worse than our reactionary opponents? You know, that's always the temptation. Even when I was young, when we were saying Soviet Union is horrible, they said, but isn't at a deeper level Western false liber democracy even worse? Apropos Ukraine, we get exactly this logic. When I listen to endless pacifist declarations, I find them quite disgusting for at least 3 reasons. We all want peace, but abstract calls for peace are not enough. Peace alone is not a term which allows us to draw a key political difference. Occupiers always want peace, sincerely, peace in the territory they occupied. Germany definitely wanted peace in the occupied France in 1940. Israel definitely wants peace on the occupied West Bank, which means the end of Palestinian resistance. And Russia is on a mission for peace in Ukraine. I sincerely, I think, since peace means for them de-Ukrainization, then it will be peace. So when one reads long and pathetic calls for peace, one should ignore all the blah blah and notice only one sentence, the only one which really matters. the West should stop sending arms to Ukraine. The logical question that follows, but does this not mean that Ukraine will fall to Russia, is then obfuscated by calls for restrained negotiations and so on. You know what really depressed me, although I'm theoretically different from her, but we had till a couple of years ago good personal contact. The great Judith Butler, she clearly condemned the Russian attack. Also, she noted and emphasized the anti-LGBT and gay orientation of Russian politics. But at the same time, she absolutely opposed giving arms to Ukraine. And when she was asked, okay, but what we should do, I quote literally her answer. I am hopeful that the Russian army will lay down its arms. Haha, I mean. Although such calls begin with a ritualized condemnation of the Russian attack, it's always this logic of fetishist disavowal. Je sais bien, mais quand même. I know that Russians are doing something horrible, but, and then all the excuses come. The usual one is a full pressure on Ukraine to show constraint, not to provoke Russia too much. Russia is treated as a crazy giant. We should not disturb too much. During his visit to Slovenia, now a couple of days ago, Jeffrey Sachs, the American economist, said in an interview about the war in Ukraine, my God, I'm against death penalty, but when somebody says something like this, my automatic reaction is shoot him. Quote, the foundation for peace in Ukraine should be that both sides return home. End of quote. A statement which, again, shocked me. As if the war is taking place in some stadium in a third neutral terrain from which both sides can withdraw. Where should Ukrainians return to when the terrain of war is their home? There is, of course, another reading of this statement, which is possible. Since it is a proxy war, both sides are Russia and NATO. But in this case, the statement is even more cynical, because what it amounts to is that NATO should withdraw its support for Ukraine. So what about another often heard argument? NATO is trying to expand to Ukraine. Sorry, but from reading all possible newspapers, my impression is exactly the opposite one. The states which are under threat, Ukraine, Finland, Sweden, they want to join NATO because they are threatened, afraid, and NATO is pretty reluctant to accept them. Furthermore, I find particularly disgusting the argument that in Ukraine, the West is fighting a proxy war with Russia, which will lead to a total devastation of Ukraine. As Putin said once, the West will fight till the last Ukrainian. Of course, Ukraine cannot win the war. It cannot win it alone without our help. But the obvious other side of this cold statement that Ukraine cannot win the war is a deeper fear and prohibition. You can read it, at least with my psychoanalytic training, between the lines. The message is Ukraine shouldn't win the war because this, again, may provoke Russia much. Did you notice when Ukraine, when was it, already half a year ago or when, was pushing back Russians? Did you notice this element of panic in the Western media? And they may be doing it fast. We shouldn't go much and so on and so on. So the problem is that for Ukraine, this is not a proxy war. It is a war in which they are fighting for their survival as a nation. Are they really so stupid to get engaged in a proxy war, fighting for others? On the afternoon of March the 1st, 2022, President Zelensky said, quote, "Ukraine is ready to die for Europe. Now let's see if Europe is ready to die for Ukraine." We should ask the question here, which Europe is Ukraine ready to die for? With all the justified critique of some key parts of the European legacy, colonialism, neocolonial exploitation, what makes Europe an object of hatred and envy all around the world is that in the eyes of many, Europe still stands for peaceful cooperation of nations, personal social freedoms, welfare state, universal healthcare, and so on. So we should ask ourselves what the Ukrainians see in Europe. And are we in Europe, Western Europe, ready to live up to these expectations? Whichever way you turn it, United Europe stands for some kind of social democracy, which is why Viktor Orban, in a recent interview, went so far as to proclaim that the Western liberal hegemony, quote, is gradually becoming Marxist. They are essentially Marxists with liberal remnants. In short, Europe is in the middle of a big ideological conflict about its identity. This is why, for Europe also, the times of complacent apathy are over. The Ukrainian war brought Europe out of its lethargy. When confronted with new global crises, we will have to act decisively and globally. Simon Jenkins, an English commentator, he commented apropos of national health service crisis in the United Kingdom that he wrote something very interesting. Quote, "The NHS, National Health Service, crisis is historic. A war footing is the only way to deal with it. So we are left with today's emergency. Nothing diminishes the support and affection for frontline staff. Like soldiers in wartime, they are workers to whom people instinctively turn when all seems lost." End of quote. The situation is similar. Sorry?
SLAVOJ, sorry, but you did tell me that I should warn you when you've
Okay,
taken
then I will
time.
condense it very shortly. Look, I have only less than 1 page left. Agree. So what I'm saying is that what the Western Europe should do is avoid its tactic till now, which is, yes, let's help Ukraine, but without disturbing or our peaceful, lethargic, apathetic way of life. No, also in other domains, global warming, helping Ukraine, and so on, healthcare, a kind of positive militarization, not in the sense of military dictatorship, but simply a state of emergency, will be necessary. Before concluding, just a quote from Joseph Stiglitz: "It is a mistake to think that the war can be won with a peacetime economy. No country has ever prevailed in a serious war by leaving markets alone. Markets simply move too slowly for the kind of major structural changes that are required." End of quote. So where do I see some hope? It's not only that, as you already said, Ukrainians, well, maybe, sorry for this bad taste joke, maybe you should, I mean, this is a cynical bad joke, construct a big monument to Putin. He finally pushed you to become fully Ukrainians. But you know what gives me hope? And you should tell me, is this true or not? in some recent comment, in some recent comments, I read that people in this state of war in Ukraine, people's desire for justice at home has not diminished. If anything, it has got stronger, and rightly so, since most citizens are risking their lives to fight that posed by, sorry, I am not, I'm there, okay. Posed by Russia. Perhaps people have such a personal stake in Ukraine's future, they are more sensitive than ever about what kind of country we are becoming and how things should be after the war. And this is my hope. Naive as it may be, people say, no, Zelensky is corrupted, he's just playing the game. No, it's clear that the war has the effect of that it imposed some kind of necessity to limit, at least to control the corruption of oligarchs and so on and so on. And now it's the time for us, whatever remains of the left, we should not only fully support unconditionally Ukraine, but we should also raise the question, but what Ukraine are we fighting for? Will it be simply the Ukraine recolonized by the Western capitalism? They don't care about you, they're playing their own games. Will it be Ukraine co-opted into the ongoing East European illiberal democracies like Poland and so on, or it will be an Ukraine which out of necessity will have to invent some new social transformation. And here the left has nothing to be afraid of. I'm concluding, no paper, just one sentence. Please, if you are still leftist, don't feel bad with this ridiculous scheme we leftists are for Russia. Are they crazy? Didn't people notice this one obvious fact? Remember Putin's two speeches, 21st and 23rd of February. Did you notice that he mentioned there only one name, critically, Lenin? He even said, you remember it, one, that the proper name of Ukraine should be Ukraina Vladimira Ilyich Lenina. He even mocked this decommunization of Ukraine. He said, you want decommunization? Fine, we will come there to really bring it to the end to help you. I mean, here at least Lenin and even Trotsky were on the right side. You know, I think, was it Anton who quoted, I think it's the last written text by Trotsky, where he said, if Ukraine in 1939 wants full state sovereignty, let's give it to it. Then he said, but what about if somebody will say this destroys the unity of Soviet Union? And Trotsky's answer is, so what? He gives a wonderful, he says, this is true proletarian internationalism, not Russia controls, but that you allow to nations full freedom. I'm not praising Lenin and Trotsky. They did horrible things. But on the other side, they started this leftist tradition which gives us a space to work. If we will not do it, I think it's the terminal phase, the end of the left. I'm sorry if I was too long. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Slavoj. And I think you've posed some really excellent questions that maybe the rest of the meeting and the rest of the panel will also reflect on. And I'm sure a lot of what you said would resonate. However, we now have quite a good number of questions that you yourself might want to answer from the audience. So
I will try to be short, sincerely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we largely have questions in two different groups. Some are dealing with kind of cultural, civilizational aspects, and some are more dealing with the left and Western imperialism. So I'm going to group them like that. I think it will make sense. So first one is from Simone. Simone is asking about Putin, who suggests that Ukraine is the instrument of Western imperialism to weaken Russia. To that extent, do you see this as the conflict between Western and Slavic Orthodox civilization that has to do with identity and values rather than competition for resources? Another question is about the role of culture in the autonomy of Ukraine, from John Valdevert, who says, seen as Ukraine has blocked certain cultural figures based on political personality, how will Ukraine develop itself as culturally autonomous going forward? Will these bans increase, decrease? And what do you see is the effect of these bans on development of culture in Ukraine?
Can I answer now very briefly, because I'm old and senile?
Yeah, go on, and then I'll group the rest.
Very briefly. First, this culture. There are maybe, I don't know the situation good enough, things done by Ukrainian government that I don't agree with. But please, you know, it's very easy to play pluralism in a safe Western containment. My God, you are fighting for your survival. Remember during World War II, how both sides censored brutally the other's culture. But at least they recognize your situation is much worse. The opponent is not just trying to win you over, to limit your autonomy. The thesis of the opponent is that you don't exist, that you are literally, it's a wonderful paradox, Bolshevik, Lenin, Nazi invention. Even this, all the point about Nazi collaboration, World War II, people should read history. It's not only the Holodomor. The conflict began in 1924 when Stalin accused Lenin of being a bourgeois nationalist. Lenin wanted more autonomy. It's also afterwards, I was shocked by reading Sheila Fitzpatrick, a very good historian, told me, you know that in this big Stalinist purge, 36, 37 years, the true madness. But in Ukraine, this was after Holodomor, it was a different level. You know that in 36, the Central Committee of Ukrainian Communist Party ruling had 200 members. You know how many of them were alive a year and a half later? 3. Not a joke. So it was such a terrible, terrible situation. And when we speak about Nazism, sorry, we have Wagner Group. We know why Wagner, because Prigozhin liked Hitler and Wagner, Hitler. So I think that what appears to us as an excess maybe appears a little bit different if you take into account the absolutely horrible situation in which Ukrainians are. Again, they are not just the enemy. They are somebody who, in the eyes of their enemy, doesn't even exist. I will try to be briefer to the very interesting first question. Russia, the West, and so on and so on. It's just resources. I believe in the material power of ideology. You know, many people telling me, but listen, this is what Putin and his idiots, Medvedev and so on, SLAVOJ are saying, this is just rhetoric. Really, they want a part of your land. No, it's never like this. Anti-Semitism was also an ideology. I agree with Marxist analysis. Its function was to present social body as harmonious. Enemy comes from outside, the Jews, but it has terrible material consequences. Millions died, and so on and so on. So I don't accept this pseudo-pragmatic realist reasoning. It's really just about some resources and so on. Never underestimate the material power of ideology. Look, that's why I like to read, not with pleasure, but with horror, histories of Germany in the last 2 years under Hitler. From the rational standpoint, the thing to do would have been to take all the Jewish men able to work and use them in armament industry. And so-called rational Nazis like, like Albert Speer tried to do this. No, the hardliners said, yes, we are going to the end, but we have to finish our duty, kill all the Jews. And in the middle of a terrible military situation, they put priority of trains to Auschwitz, Treblinka, and so on, over trains bringing arms men to the front, and so on. So again, I reject this simple pseudo-Marxist vulgar explanation. Don't worry, it's just about a piece of land. No, it's not.
Thank you so much, SLAVOJ. Excellent response. There are,
yeah, but attack me more, please. I will.
I will. There are a few questions, but there are a few questions specifically about speaking about the left, and I'm going to bundle them together, being aware of time. So a couple of people are asking about what is actually wrong with this so-called left. How are people, for example, who saw what happened in Yugoslavia, now are spouting Russian propaganda, for example, and take a pro-Russian position? What is wrong with them? How can they justify multipolar world, right? Because if in some parts of the world, for some, it may make sense. Then for others, it makes no sense whatsoever. Then there are all of these American left, so to speak, organizations like Code Pink and Left Forum and the rest, who are actually also doing a lot of the same. Yet there are some on the left, like John McDonnell in the UK, who actually have a much clearer vision of what is happening on the ground. And to that, I will also add from myself, in the light of what you said here and what you've written since this invasion started, and also the essay where you talk about the culture of wokeness. And why it is here to stay, with that kind of psychoanalysis of dreams. Because it's very important, like, what you mentioned about Butler today, and like how so many feminists, like Nancy Fraser, for example, and Cynthia Arusa, they all signed that letter that said no to arms to Ukraine, that they condemned the invasion, but no to arms. So I want to ask you, like, there is this reality, and you talked about it today, that there is this horrendous state of emergency with climate change, with world hunger, with austerity, with poverty, that many of these self-proclaimed progressives do not want to acknowledge the scope of, right? And what it will take to deal with it. So is this kind of fake pacifism, bourgeois luxury pacifism, also a form of a dream that allows them to take a break from the reality in which we are? Thank you.
Excellent, because now you automatically came to the part that I have to cut. I think precisely in one of these texts, I quote that famous Freud's dream, whose point is, when we in dream, we encounter a trauma, we awaken precisely to be able to continue to dream. And this is, I think, what all this awakening calls: awaken to danger, nuclear threat, and so on and so on. So again, back to the question. I think the situation here, I don't have time to do it now, deserves a more detailed analysis. First, the left, one of the things is that the left in the West is so obsessed by this topic of anti-Eurocentrism. You must feel bad to say European. It means your hands are full of blood of colonialism and so on, all that. So that the moment somebody attacks Europe, you are almost automatically conditioned to defend them. And as I mentioned in that text, wokeness is here to stay. What makes me really depressive are two things. First, I learned from some friends in Russia who, under pseudonym, still let me know, that Putin did here something almost ingenious. He doesn't have only this reactionary madman, Dugin, Solovyov, and so on. So I was told he hired a group of young ex-Marxists who provide this pseudo-Marxist justification, which is Russia is really fighting against Western imperialism, neocolonialism, that Russia stands on the barricades for all third world people who refuse to see what is obvious to me. This war is such a trauma for us, Western Europeans, although some people would say Slovenians, not that, because, now we have here a colonial war. This is a clear case of colonial war, Russian aggression on Ukraine, and I was here, both sides, we and the third world country should act in a proper way. The third world country should admit, I was shocked when I learned that South Africa, Brazil, and some others show understanding for Russia, that, they often reproach Western Europe that you're still playing the colonial game, exploitation, and so on. But I will tell them, but if you want us to sympathize with your anti-colonialism, then please join us in condemning a clear case of colonial aggression here now. That's the thing. Second thing is this fear of emancipatory universalism. Whatever you can say against Europe, I don't buy that politically correct stance that any idea of human rights, universal values, rights of women equals that we in the West automatically impose our own values on it. No, it's not like this. You know what is for me a triumphant case? Look, many leftists sympathized with Iran, the mullah, the regime. Nonetheless, it's an authentic forum. Now we had this incredible movement of resistance in Iran, triggered and led by women. Moments, or not to mention China and so on, moments like this prove what? That no, leftist, so-called emancipatory Western leftist values have a universal appeal. That's why all the third world authoritarians are terribly afraid of them. When Putin speaks about authentic multiculturalism, you know what he means? He means the model is always, I hope you would agree, how when Taliban took over in Afghanistan, you remember China immediately made peace with them. And it was a dirty deal. You do there with women, blah, blah, whatever you want, allow us to do with Uyghur Muslims our own whatever we want. This is a multiculturalism of each country leave it alone to its own brutal exploitation of women, its minorities, and so on. And here comes, sorry to talk too much, the point which is absolutely crucial to me. That's where I was a little bit critical of some Ukrainian, not pro-Russian, Ukrainian politicians who claim, we are fighting for Europe against Russia, whatever. No, the struggle is universal. If you paint the conflict, Ukrainian war, as the conflict of civilizations, you are already talking Alexander Dugin's language. His Russian truth versus Western European truth. No, that's why they are so afraid of the democratic emancipatory appeal, all those dictators, because they know there is a universal dimension in it. And again, the left should not buy this cheap critique of universalism as always a form of Western imperialism and so on. I even say that the left only really functions as universal left. If it's not universal, it's not left. That's my problem with identity politics. And I quote in that text, I will immediately finish. Alena, don't be nervous. I can read body language. That's why
later for some
that's
of
why what
friends
it shocked me. Yeah, you remember how there are even now pacts between Islam fundamentalists and feminists, because now the predominant ideological language in the West is to be wounded, to be hurt. Like if a Muslim fundamentalist said, in I don't know which university where a lady was giving a talk with without her hair covered.
We're moving a bit into, I think, a very long conversation that neither you or I will do justice right now.
I agree. I agree. Tavaris, Comrade Alena Stalinova, I agree with you fully. You have to stop me.
You said in the beginning I should do it, and so I do it. I'm sorry. I'm ruthless in this.
No, but really, you know that I wrote a chapter celebrating as a psychological type, not her politics, Margaret Thatcher. The left needs a leftist Margaret Thatcher, you know, who does the right thing, but with the same decision. But let me just conclude with one thing. You know, no, really. Every morning when I waken, I don't know what to do. I'm old. I have next week 3 heart examination, whatever. But every morning that I awaken, I'm ashamed that I'm not with you there in Ukraine. And as soon as medically possible, I would like to come there. It's a kind of a absolute moral duty for me.
Thank you, SLAVOJ. Thank you for this ending. And I'm sure everyone who's currently in Kyiv or anywhere in Ukraine, or indeed all the people who can't be there for various reasons, really appreciate this dedication.
No, I'm grateful to you again. Just one conclusion, allow me. What I said at the beginning, it's so important that at the level of philosophy theory, you don't allow, you know, the Western left likes to sympathize in this patronizing way with people who suffer somewhere else. But they know better. They then provide the explanation. No, you should explain what is happening.
So let's give Yulia in Kyiv the floor to explain to us exactly how we should be sympathizing.
I'm sorry for having to abandon you now, but it was an honor for me. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much, SLAVOJ. We need to clearly organize a whole separate section where we can have all of these conversations.
No,
and now,
but in your spirit, in the sense of attacking me, I'm open to it. Not in this sense that I know better. You know, my vision is very limited here and so on.
Yeah, we're going to need a lot of time to attack you. And now we're going to pass the word over to Yulia in Kyiv.
And then there are 2 Yulias, I know.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I have dirty comments. BENTIA associating Slovene with Jebenti, you know, like, nice name. Sorry, I cannot resist.
It's late. So
bye-bye.
The same route in Ukrainian, thanks.
Thanks.
Yulia, sorry, a bit later than you've hopefully expected to speak, but we're very much all ears and looking forward to hearing maybe some reflections on what SLAVOJ said, or maybe you want to take us in a different direction. The floor is
yours. The first thing, thank you for inviting me, and it was a real pleasure for me to listen to SLAVOJ's speech. Of course, I recently listened to in YouTube. There are some of his recent speeches, so some of these topics he has already covered. So I was maybe I was prepared to this style, and when I had these speeches, I was happy even more of this invitation. So because it was just what we need, what we think about. So he's fully in our side. And even he understands even our inner problems. I'm not going to cover maybe the main painful in a discussion, but we really have it about the future of Ukraine, what kind of Ukraine would we like to have after Ukraine win. So it was just great, and I think that my speech will be more boring, of course, but shorter. I have just 3 pages, and it would be about my personal professional experience during last year in Krytyka, how it went, what topics we discussed, and the dynamics. I think it might be interesting, and you all are or our persons about whom we are writing, or books. Yeah, I know. So we are almost all in connected, and recently we also published several statements of Ukraine's solidarity campaign, and it's also honor for Krytyka. So, and I will talk about this thing. So should I start now? Yeah. So since 2016, I have worked as executive editor at Krytyka Journal. I would like to talk about the messages that Krytyka put forward during the past year in the special topic, Russian invasion of Ukraine, because in essence, I want to believe that our publications have reflected and shaped the dynamics of discussion which within the Ukraine society, as well as formulated the important narratives that Ukraine addressed to the West in order to achieve understanding, solidarity, and sustainable support for resistance to Russian imperialism. And here is my key point. The literal physical survival of Ukraine as a state of Ukraine identity and culture now depends on the success of the armed forces of Ukraine at the front. And this success, in its turn, depends on the military aid of Western countries. The less weapons we have, the more people we lose. And this is probably the most problematic aspect for the Western public, which is ready to help in every possible way. And indeed, they provide help to Ukrainian children and women, but they are more wary of supporting the Ukrainian army. Instead, we often hear hypocritical warnings that supply of weapons will not stop the war, that Ukraine should immediately start so-called peace talks with the invader country of marauders and rapists, which for Ukraine will only mean the expansion and perpetuation of Russian genocidal practices. Such calls are, of course, the product of Russian propaganda. And in this context, I would like to mention the recent interview of the Ukrainian photographer Mstislav Chernov, who was in Mariupol at the beginning of its occupation. He claimed that it is impossible to win an argument with Russian propaganda. Not every discussion is worth having. The only way out is to expand the field of reality and truth, to fix events around us and to make sense of them in photos and texts. To gather evidence about the executions of Ukrainian book owners, the destruction of civilian infrastructure, the introduction of Russian colonized school curricula and textbooks, the looting of museums, the establishment of torture camps, on the occupied territories and the playing of Soviet popular songs from the loudspeakers of the public address system in those places. A compromise with Russia will only mean that all this will be happening not only in Crimea and the occupied parts of Donetsk and Lugansk Oblasts, but throughout Ukraine, which Russia, in its violent fantasies, imagines as its one region. Anyone who is familiar with Krytyka knows that it is a cultural journal that has been published in Ukraine for over 25 years and was founded by its current editor-in-chief, Harvard professor George Grabovich. From the beginning, the journal published long essays and book reviews mostly for academic audiences in Ukraine and Slavic studies around the world. On the evening of the 24th of February 2022, Professor Grabovich organized a Skype meeting of the editorial team, and despite utter despair, Grabovich urged us to plan for the future. At the timely request of the Eurozyme network, on the third day of the full-scale war, Grabovich wrote an editorial statement which was translated into many languages. Its main point was, and here I quote, "Ukraine's defense is a moral and existential issue for the entire Western and democratic world." End of quote. In the first days and even weeks, all of us who were in Ukraine had to somehow cope with terrible psychological shock and numbness, because it was about the literal survival and rescue of relatives and friends from all around Ukraine, from Mariupol to Chernihiv. At the same time, direct involvement in digging trenches, delivering bulletproof vests and food, donated money and resources for various needs, all this practical work provided psychological grounding and saved us from despair. The journal's online publications also changed. They became quite concise, focused, and short. On the one hand, they recorded private experiences, and on the other, these texts formulated a basic understanding of the Russian-Ukrainian war, and most of them combined the former with the latter. We all felt that at the moment we were in the epicenter of world events, and at the same time it was a very important private experience for each of us. So when the Kyiv printing houses started working again, and we were able to publish the first print issue for 2022, it looked very strange. There were a lot of short texts, many photos, long contents, and no information about the author's academic status and affiliation, because in a certain sense, the war equalized everyone. The usual format of the journal gradually returned over the course of the year, but even now it is a question whether the reader is ready to accept publication outside the military context. The pre-war topics have regained their relevance as they give us a sense of normality in life. But what did the Krytyka community write about at the beginning of the full-scale invasion? About the absurdity of the Russian denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine, about the disastrous vagueness of political priorities and perspectiveness in Ukraine public discourse over the last 30 years, about the importance of Ukraine's voices in the West, that this terrorist war is the responsibility not only of Putin, but of the entire Russian country and its people, about the imperial nature of the Russian invasion, which has yet to be fully understood and deconstructed. Krytyka authors have recently written about the need for balance in Western Slavic studies, where Russia and its imperial visions still dominate. Our authors have looked at historical analogies Just 2 days ago, Krytyka published an overview of the Russian and Soviet genocides. Krytyka published many calls for the protection of Ukrainian culture and the limitation of Russian cultural influence in the West, as well as statements in support of Ukraine, including several ones from the Ukraine Solidarity Campaign. Historical knowledge and personal experience convince us that we cannot have illusion either about Russia or about the Russians who had been prepared for this war by Russian propaganda for 2 decades, or about Russian liberals who consider themselves the same kind of victim of this war as Ukrainians. Ukraine is now fighting for self-preservation and physical survival, for our own agency, statehood, and cultural autonomy, to avoid captivity in a large torture camp. And for this, Ukraine needs military assistance. Thank you, and I'm happy to answer your questions. But remember that I am not a political scholar. I am art study scholar, but last year I was involved in all this editing, mostly political article. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Yulia. We really appreciate joining us, and I think actually we can all be thinkers. We can have our theories, but the people who actually put things to paper, the words to paper, and allow us to read each other's ideas and exchange these ideas and broaden our understanding in the best case scenario, of course, are really vital. I mean, we know the role of wartime propaganda. It's always been big, and same with allowing space for unaffiliated thoughts and texts and theories and impressions that people have. So absolutely, we talked a lot about key workers when the pandemic hit. I think people working in publishing, especially in the environment of a war, are key workers. Absolutely. So very much appreciate you bringing us these perspectives from inside Ukraine as well. I think we might, because we did this to accommodate SLAVOJ in the beginning, to take questions immediately after. But maybe we can now go back to hearing from our other panelists as well, and then respond to some questions after people have had time to filter through what has been said and reflect on it. And so we're going to move on to Anton, and with a request from me, perhaps to give us at least a brief insight into why you decided to form Philosophers for Ukraine. What is the unique perspective you think of philosophers in this?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thank you for having me here. And the idea to start a campaign was a sudden decision, and it was fueled by an anxiety. I was in a small motel room for people who drive trucks, just somewhere between Kyiv and Lviv, where I was heading. And I just woke up and I was thinking, like, how can I help? How can I help? And I guess this thought, how can I help, was an obsessive thought, which drove lots of people those days. So some people were preparing Molotov cocktails, some people were cooking for territorial defense forces, some people were conscripting to join the military, some people were starting to volunteer just like by calling on Instagram. And I remember that I am a philosopher by training, and I sometimes write as a philosopher. So I just thought, okay, I should pull some of my academic contacts and maybe something would pop up of it. And actually it did, it worked quite well. And we managed to, with some of my colleagues and friends, we managed to mobilize pretty nice support, I guess. Yeah. And as far as your question about what philosophers can do, this would probably be, the answer would probably be somewhere in my talk. So I would probably move on to it. I guess I at least pose this question, and I would be very quick, so not to cannibalize any time. So yeah, I would start with maybe an obvious thing with the headline we have. So we have the headline of solidarity with the Ukraine campaign, and I would like to talk about. I would try to be a bit of philosophical with respect to solidarity, and I would claim that there is a split inside the notion of solidarity. So solidarity has two sides. Two important sides, but two sides that we should acknowledge, and we should never ignore one with respect to another. And the obvious example about solidarity would be the way West and Europe treated Ukrainians. And the solidarity was enormous, very significant, and it manifested itself in a very great and unconditional, in a way, help for displaced persons, refugees, not so unconditional with military support, because their weapons are never enough for us, but especially if we compare it with the behavior of Western governments prior to the war, the difference would be significant. We had Germans who sent us, probably mockingly, I don't know, 5,000 helmets in January, when it was pretty obvious that Russia would attack. And now we have a huge shift. And so this solidarity, this first example I described, it exemplifies, you know, this universal dimension of solidarity, which I would like to call solidarity in struggles. And, you know, you see people in trouble and you want to help. And that's simple. That's common sense. You have empathy and you think, how can I help? And you help somehow. This is pretty much ongoing. It is pretty strong, and it has enormous significance because it really helped. But I would like to say that there may be some pitfalls to this solidarity in struggles. And here comes my second example. I was in Austria, I guess, a couple of weeks before our forum, before today. Actually, men are not allowed to leave the country, but if you have a permission, you can. So I got the permission and left for the conference. And I was talking with Austrian academicians, you know, those highbrow topics, some theoretical ones. And I found out a very interesting feeling in myself. So whenever you mention you came from Ukraine, people have this look. And they look at you as if you are terminally ill or something. I don't know, you got cancer or something. And it may be fun, it may be uncomforting, but I guess this ordinary example has some deep philosophical truth in it. And this is an example of how people try to solidarize with you in your struggles, and they refer to your finitude, you know, like this universal finitude of human beings. So we're all mortal, we're all fragile, we suffer from injustices, and people try to resonate with it somehow, and it really resonates. But I would like to say that there is another solidarity, and I guess SLAVOJ mentioned something of it a bit. The solidarity which can be called solidarity in vision. So not the solidarity which comes not when people unite in their fragility, but when they unite in their universal strive towards something. And this solidarity can be infinite and can be devoid of this pessimistic, melancholic vibe, so to say. And I would like to pose a problem and probably to pose a way to next steps. So we see that there is a lack of vision with respect to Ukraine nowadays and with respect to people who solidarize with Ukraine. So everybody understands that Ukraine is struggling and fighting, and people can resonate with it. But it becomes more urgent and more significant to propose a vision. And I would like to suggest that this vision is not and should not be only Ukrainian, because it should be universal. And it is of enormous significance, especially in the second year of the full-scale war of Russia against Ukraine, because at some point people in the West will get tired of the war. They would clap you above the shoulder and say, you Ukrainians are tough guys, you proved it, but now let's stop. And the way to unblock this reaction is to provide people around us, people in the West, people in Europe, and probably all around the world, because it is a universal question, with a new vision, and to bring the vision back. And I would not give answers here. I would pose like 3 components that I see as as parts of this vision. They should probably include some kind of reimagining security, the word that was highly abused in politics, in even in philosophy. You can bring up somebody like Alain Badiou, who said that security is some capitalistic fetishism and something unimportant. But it is, I guess, it is easy to say that security is not important when you are staying in France. And probably the importance of security was proven by the year of Russia-Ukraine war. I guess the second component would be justice, because the aggression of Russia was totally unprovoked, unjustified, and to claim new status quo would mean to claim new justice. And what this justice would look like is a great question for theoreticians. And the third component, I thought that it would be more unexpected, but SLAVOJ touched a bit of this topic, and I'm happy that he did, because it seems that the importance of it is visible. I think that this third component, besides security and justice, is Europe, because it is not a trivial thing to think about Europe today and what this name really means. Apart from traditional claims and claims that did not work or worked not well enough, because sometime prior to the war, Europe was associated with these claims about like civil liberties, human rights, and now we see that it is not so, or partly not so. So it is a way to reimagine Europe also. So three components of the vision of a post-war future, of a post-war world worth fighting for, security, justice, and Europe. And I suggest to every of you, both panelists and guests, to think about it, about all these elements, because it is an urgent question which won't settle itself by itself. It is a call to us all. Yeah, I guess I'm ready. I guess that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you very much, Anton. I'm sure people have found, have latched onto different things from what you said. For me, especially these three things that we need to imagine now in perhaps a new way, and answering the question, what is Europe, is very very relevant, and it's I think it's something that has obviously changed from Ukraine's perspective, but also Europe has been changed by, and continues to be changed every day by Ukraine, by people who have come, but also by this conundrum that it has suddenly presented for European establishment in many ways. But we can explore that after we hear from Olga as well. Olga, thank you for patiently waiting with us all evening. My one reassurance is that you are now in Germany, so it is not as late as it is for YULIYA and for Anton, but lovely to see you, and I look forward to hearing from you, and any reflections you have also from cultural theorists, and how you and your friends, your colleagues, are working and thinking through what is happening to you.
Thank you, Alena, and thank you all for wonderful panel. I actually agreed with Chris previously, so that I will focus on one particular thing related to my experience to war, and that same is my communication with Noam Chomsky. And I'll stick to my text to be as short as possible. It should be about 10 or plus minutes. So I relate to Anton that first moments, the first days of the war, you think, how can I possibly help with whatever I can? And one of my decisions was, okay, I read all this horrible or unhelpful interviews Noam Chomsky gave, and I thought to write him. I wrote to Noam Chomsky first time in early April 2022. I knew he reads and answers all letters he receives. He actually talked about it many times, regardless of the status of the person who wrote. And I respected this a lot. So I wrote to him out of nowhere with the caption, "Letter from Ukraine." It was my personal fight to let Ukrainian voice be heard. The communication was short, but it was resumed in July 22, and an intensive 2-week back and forth followed. A lot of arrogant dismissal and a lot of intellectual gaslighting. Chomsky was throwing at me phrases like, "You're severely misguided," Sorry that you cannot comprehend that. At some point, I've got it. His own propaganda model has such thick filters that any reality that contradicts it does not have chance to penetrate them. It was a waste of time. Moreover, I caught him lying. Let me tell you about this. In his many unhelpful interviews on the war in Ukraine, Chomsky referred to a certain consensus among the experts about what is possible for Ukraine and for the world, but gave only one single name, Anton Levin. I tried to explain in our communication to Chomsky what kind of expert this Anton Levin is. He is a British journalist specialized in the Middle East. As a side thing, he also helped to promote the Russian narrative of NATO expansion beginning back to the 90s. After 2014, Levin suddenly presented himself as an expert on Ukraine without knowing Ukrainian language, Ukrainian history, and of course many other things, as so many Western experts on Ukraine are. He continued to disseminate highly dubious narratives at the beginning of the massive invasion in 2022, and then later amended his views, his kind of career guy, something that Chomsky chose to ignore. I have asked Chomsky, why did he rely on such experts instead of listening to Ukrainians? And I've got a very surprising answer. Chomsky wrote that he listens to Ukrainians all the time. Very illuminating and sensible discussions, he added. I asked Chomsky to give me names of those Ukrainians whose discussions he found illuminating and sensible, but he avoided answering the question. I said that I refused to continue our conversation until he answers the question. He did not, so I left him to listen to his imaginary Ukrainians. As a farewell sentence, he called me an internal enemy of Ukraine. I was amazed that this Stalinist vocabulary is still in circulation. What is left of this communication is my short poem. It is addressed to Noam Chomsky, Vladimir Putin, and all worried about fighting to the last Ukrainians, the phrase that SLAVOJ mentioned, but which has much longer biography. The poem was published on Ukraine Solidarity Campaign website this summer. This poem is a document in a literal sense, and I would like to unpack its documentary quality. First, the phrase "fighting to the last Ukrainian," which was popularized by Noam Chomsky. The full version of this phrase is US fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. The phrase was coined by Ches Freeman, a retired senior US diplomat and ambassador to Saudi Arabia, infamous for many reasons, including his leaked email in which he justified Tiananmen Square massacre. In the interview on 24th of March regarding war in Ukraine, Freeman gave a whole playbook of Russian propaganda. For example, obviously he repeated the mantra of NATO expansion, which provoked Russia, and this mantra is also very dear to Noam Chomsky. In Freeman's words, the NATO went, I quote, right up to Russia's borders and beyond them, beyond those borders in Baltics. So he implied that Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania are Russian territories. This is 2022. Other moment in that interview where Freeman coined this phrase was that Ukraine was not really a country, at least recently, and here's the quote from Freeman: Mr. Zelensky was elected to head a state called Ukraine, and he has created the nation called Ukraine. So these are just very few pieces of the whole playbook that was like fully present in that interview, and apparently Chomsky was not alarmed by these things and was comfortable to repeat time and again this phrase coined by Friedman, that fighting Russia to the last Ukrainian. This phrase suggests a certain reality. that there is no Ukrainian resistance against Russian imperialistic aggression, that it is not an anti-colonial struggle, but something entirely different, a proxy war between the US and Russia that happens to be in the country called Ukraine. And Slavoj was talking about how pervasive this vision is among left, not only among left. Only in this version of reality, actually, this anecdotal story, real or fictional, that Bush promised Gorbachev that NATO would not expand to the east has any meaning. Because, of course, in this version of reality, US president has a total right to decide destiny of those non-existent peoples that happen to be in Russian backyard. And all these discussions about whether this happened or not, it's like really preoccupy Chomsky and all this cohort around him. This view aligns well with Putin's reality. For Putin, the very notion of agency of people does not exist, neither in Russia or in its backyard. It is not a surprise, but rather a logical move that at some point Putin found useful the phrase coined by Freeman and popularized by Chomsky. In his speech on the 8th of July 2022, Putin said, "We have heard many times that the West wants to fight us to the last Ukrainian. This is a tragedy for Ukrainian people, but it seems that everything is heading toward this." When I saw that exact phrase seemingly flown from Chomsky's mouth to that of Putin, I thought that reality is condensing to the burning point where only poetry can capture it. There was also another phrase, which both Chomsky and Putin repeat. This phrase implies that the reality is unjust, but it does not do any good to resist this injustice. We all know Putin's obscene remark, the one he made on the 7th of February 2022, less than a month before this full-scale invasion. Regarding the Minsk agreement, Putin said, "Нравится, не нравится, терпи, красавица, like it or not, it's your beauty, it's your duty, beauty." We all read Slavoj's piece on its rapist implications. It was published on the 24th of February, the day of massive invasion. Here's what Chomsky said regarding diplomatic solution, which requires territorial concessions to Russia. You may not like it. You may not like the fact that there is a hurricane coming tomorrow, but you can't stop it by saying, "I don't like hurricanes," or "I do not recognize hurricanes." That doesn't do any good, end of the quote. In my correspondence with Chomsky, I pushed this hurricane metaphor further and asked him, if you think it is impossible to fight hurricane, how do you think it is possible to negotiate with it? One of many questions he chose to ignore. Symbolically, this hurricane interview of Chomsky happened to be published on the 13th of April 2022. On that exact same day when Moskva, the flagship of the Russian Black Sea Fleet, was hit by Ukrainian forces and sunk during the following night. I remember this day very well. I was in evacuation with my family in the small town in Western Ukraine that hosted a lot of refugees, or rather internally displaced persons. The following morning, when the news circulated, I saw people on the streets smiling, probably for the first time since the 24th of February. Strangers hugged and kissed, and everyone was just repeating a single word, Moskva, Moskva. There was a real sense of happiness. It is not that we didn't believe that we would win this war. No one in Ukraine doubts that. But this was a day when we all were able to breathe in this precious air of victory, the day when we could sense this future. This was one of the elevating experiences. I call it an awareness of common destiny. The 13th of April 2022 proved Chomsky to be wrong. It proved that it is possible to fight a hurricane. It proved that it is possible to resist an overwhelming power. a lesson that humanity should learn time and again. Today is the 13th of March, 2023, 11 months after this turning point in Ukrainian resistance. A lot has changed. The fight goes on. Let me finish by reading the poem. To Noam Chomsky, Vladimir Putin, and all worried about fighting to the last Ukrainian. You say we are too small to fight, and they are too big to lose. You say it is not really right, but stronger always rules. You say aggressor was provoked and comes as hurricane. You say to us your dirty joke, like it or not, obey. The workers were told the same, and blacks have heard again. You were born to be a slave, don't fight a hurricane. You say we'll die before we win, and that will not be right. We say to you and all your kin, like it or not, we'll fight. Thank you.
Thank you, Olga. Thank you for sharing this. And I remember when we met in the summer and you were reflecting on that communication and that whole process, and perhaps the healthy thing for all of us coming out of this experience is to do away with affinity and some kind of reverence for authority voices that refuse to remove the filters that you spoke about in the beginning, that have set up a view that they adhere to and refuse to engage with the reality, with our reality, with others' reality. I thought a lot about that meeting and what you said, and I think yes, there are ways to imagine learning from others that don't look like this and that don't lead to that kind of behavior. So I think we can open the forum for some questions, and people have used the Q&A function, and there's also two people who have their hands raised, and I'm going to abuse the chairing privileges, and I'm actually going to allow them to ask their questions. And yes, I will share Olga's poem in the chat if she allows us to do that. But I think we've published it before, so that ship has sailed. It is in the public domain, so I'm going to put it in the chat. And I'm going to ask Mike Davis to ask his question now.
Thanks, Alina, and thanks to all the speakers. Really, really informative. My actual question was to Zizek. It was following on his quote from Stiglitz about the inadequacy of a peacetime economy. In the West, that was a reference to the West to defeat Putin. And I wanted to find out more about what the implications were for that view of how the West needs to change if it's to defeat Putin's imperialist colonization of first Ukraine and perhaps elsewhere. So that was the question. It's maybe unfair to ask it of any of our panelists, but if any panelists have got a thought on that, I'd welcome it.
They could interpret it in other ways as well. It might not be just to do with the economy, but change is happening and change is needed. So I'm sure they will have thoughts. And I've also seen Yuliya's hand, so Yuliya will also come in to ask a question. But before, I think let's hear from Peter Cooper.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hello?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you quite well.
Okay, right. I'm getting an echo back. My question is, isn't the war both an anti-colonial war of liberation and a US-led proxy war? The two are not in contradiction. In the same way, for example, many of us supported the Vietnamese war against US colonialism, but we also recognized that it was a proxy war by Russia and China against America. It wasn't a reason not to support the Vietnamese. But we do have to recognize that there are distinct interests in this war, none of which takes away from the importance of supporting the struggle of the Ukrainian people.
How do we organize it? Shall we just grab the microphone and go ahead?
I thought we can take another question first.
Okay.
And it will be actually Yulia for some adherence to gender parity at least. And then we can go around and people can answer what they feel it's their prerogative to answer.
Thank you, and I'm going to try to be brief. I think like there are quite distinct voices in this panel today, but there is also a lot of resonance amongst what is said, and a lot of it was quite a kind of visceral thinking experience. The materiality of this war and kind of how we lived through it, and kind of put me back into how that felt in my body as well when the war started. And of course, that feeling kind of never went away because it's not over, not that it can go away. But I want to go back to the kind of the reality, the materiality of war and how it actually transforms how we think about what we thought we knew and what we thought we understand, because we do start perceiving certain things that were rather abstract for us quite differently. Sometimes not, but sometimes things get into a different focus. And you all spoke to how what you did and what you felt you needed to do and how your everyday was and how your priorities were shaped really were changed by this most recent full-out war. And it also makes us think, not just because we're all, we're scholars, we're some of us are philosophers, some of us are in politics, some are in arts, but we also hold certain ideological frameworks and we adhere to certain sets of values. And it comes back to this kind of idea of what is Europe, like, and what are we fighting for? What are we trying to achieve in our scholarship? What are we trying to achieve in our activism? What are we trying to achieve in what we do when we're in a difficult situation? And it speaks to also, to what all of you described. And, and I'm glad that we kind of started with Zizek and finished with this attack on Chomsky and how hollow those values are. Right? This whole kind of arc of people on the left who say that they're anti-imperialist, that they are anti-colonialist, and then when you have a neo-imperialist, neo-colonial invasion, all of a sudden, all they offer you is, I'm going to say it sarcastically, thoughts and prayers. But if you're lucky, if you get that, often you're also being schooled, told off, and basically, and gaslighted. I'm glad, Olga, that you mentioned that, because I fight them on my academic fronts, and I get that a lot as well. And it's really infuriating because you're being treated like you're stupid, you don't understand things, and the reality as you see it is wrong. Even though the reality that they are trying to explain to you, they have no idea of. So it is quite frustrating. So I wanted to kind of invite you to perhaps comment on this, on kind of on what these realities will actually tell us about the real values. And is that kind of, the dream that we tell ourselves, like, because you really kind of get in the wash of the war, everything comes clear. Who actually is anti-imperialist? Who is anti-colonialist? what kind of values they really have, and that kind of the idea of what is Europe, because a lot of what people are fighting for in Ukraine, and I've been trying to explain to people on the left and not only in Western academia who I cross paths with for years now, especially since 2014, that people who were on Maidan, where they didn't think that with the EU flag, all of their dreams will come true. But there is that set of values that people fight for, that idea of Europe, of rule of law, of ability to realize, to live and realize a good life, and to have your dignity and decency and human rights protected, right? So like, if you could speak to some of these, I think it's just like, there is so much that spoke to me that it would be actually great to, if you could comment more on this. And it's not kind of, the values, because like what we've seen that, in this kind of what amongst a number of politicians being exposed is that that those values don't go much beyond the rhetoric, because a lot of what they are offering us with those values is the sanctity of so-called free markets, which are not really very free. But through those, actually fixing the war problems or fixing the problems of poverty or climate change is impossible. And this kind of, the hypocrisy of that kind of rhetoric, in that also there is a lie, like in the kind of so-called leftists like Chomsky's, there is a lie. So the new future Ukraine and the new future universality should be shaped on the basis of real values that have material weight, in a sense, to my mind. I'm going to stop there because I realize that I'm also kind of I'm just very excited about this panel, so I'm being carried away. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Yulia. I think this is a very good kind of framing of how to approach perspectives from this whole conversation and the questions that have been raised. So who would like to start first? Maybe Olga, yeah, sure.
Yes, so thank you so much for these wonderful questions. And I actually will use this possibility to add one more point, because I think, I guess Slavoj was also mentioning this, that we are just too much focused on Europe, and universal appeal of our struggle gets overlooked because of that. And it's very important to understand that if we talk about anti-colonial war, we do not kind of like, we should talk about Algiers, maybe not about Europe. And that would appeal to France, for example, who says, oh no, that's not our war, like we do not understand this. Because actually what I was trying to bring to table is that what we do in Ukraine is not something like special for Ukraine. It's kind of like we demonstrate what humanity is capable of. Every humanity, every oppressed group is able to face this overwhelming power. And that's the proof, and that's the universal dimension. And I understand that there are interests on the West and we cannot discard them, but to the Peter's question, our struggle is not only for survival. Our struggle is for our agency. And when you say to us that this is war, of course you can have your little struggle, but isn't it still a proxy war? It's totally defined that we are dying here. And it was our choice. And West was suggesting Zelensky to flee and sending us helmets and all kind of things. And we pushed this arms with every demand we heard no from the West. So please remember when you start talking about proxy war, of course, we are aware that West is not giving things for free, and we are aware that this is the world we live in, but we are fighting. And that is our war. And it is our war not only for survival, it is our war for our agency, which was denied for so many years, decades, and centuries.
Thank you, Olga. I think that's a very succinct way of putting it. And I think an explanation, perhaps, that we should all be reflecting on when we're having these conversations. which unfortunately we keep having with many people in our campaigning work as well. Anton, you want to go next?
Yeah, sure. I would try to build up a bit on what Olga said, and it would actually, I think, resonate with her beautiful poem. I like the ending very much, like it or not, we'll fight. And I published a short text on the Ukrainian Solidarity Campaign website, which was called 5 Theoretical Reflections about Ukrainian Resistance. And I was posing there this claim that it is a natural drive to be against. When somebody pushes on you, it is a natural thing to react and to fight. And I guess Negri and Hart call it a will to be against, and it is a part of being human to be against oppression, against forcing to do something, etc. And sometimes we in Ukraine and Ukrainians abroad hear this strange question like, why do you fight? And for me, it is a nonsensical question, like very stupid, to be honest, because it is a natural way to react. We are fighting when somebody tries to not only like rob you or abuse you, but in this war to kill you and to destroy you and to destroy your culture. And coming to the question of abuses maybe of power today, or maybe some hard pushing against some cultural activities, if there are any, it is this reaction, like this will to reclaim your agency. And sometimes maybe it touches upon this question of different interests in this war also. Like everybody wants Ukrainians to be brave, to fight effectively, and not to be like too harming or too abusive, or everybody wants you to choose the wars. Like you should fight, you should beat Russians, and you also should be nice. But actually, guys, this is not how it works, and this is not how the war works, and this is not a nice situation. And I guess that would be my take on it. Hope it would be helpful, but this is not about being nice or being correct or being like pure. Like, so if there are foreign interests, Western interests in what's going on in Ukraine, it is not somehow pure. So we should stay away from it. And but there are no pure substances, and this is this logic of purification is actually what Russia is abusing. Like, so they're trying to purify us somehow. Like you have a Ukrainian, you rub him or her, and oh, here is the Russian. This is the same logic, to be honest, and that won't help us anyhow. Yeah.
Thank you, Anton. It's not that the point is to be helpful to us, but it is actually. I think it is helpful to think about this dichotomy between wanting someone else to be strong, but also wanting them to be like morally pure, politically pure, to represent you in some way, or your values, or your thinking, in a situation where you're completely removed from that, actually. So yes, I do find it a very kind of useful way to reflect on some of these impossible demands that are made on Ukrainians, including by many of us who absolutely support the struggle. And Yulia, over to you. It's been a very long night, but much appreciated.
I want to tell maybe a couple of words, because this question of Yulia Yurchenko touched me deeply. So, and as I am musician and musicologist, and maybe you had a lot of our conservatory struggle for this renaming of Conservatory Tchaikovsky and all this weird stories, and also a lot of problems in our humanities that and what is changed. We started to notice a lot of things that even 2 years before we regarded normal, maybe, normal or usual. So this war and this death and this struggling, it made more visible problems in our professional communities, and we just look at our articles and what sources we are quoted, and could we read Western publication or not, language knowledge, a lot of problems and a lot of work. And I remember that in the beginning, in February first days, of course we were shocked, and it was this we could feel just weak, and it was thought, okay, we are in a war, it's okay not to do anything. Yeah, we could just I don't know, at least eat and do something, and it's okay because we are victim. But at the next moment, you understand that it doesn't work, and it's all this agency stuff, it's really the main thing, that we are responsible for us, for our country, for our building. We organized with neighbors, we started to help each other, because many towns were blocked and without food supply and every other, and we felt support of each other. And now but in returning to conservatory, we see now how it's harmful to this lie about that fact that Tchaikovsky established Kiev Conservatory, and it's replicated still in many medias. And that it's our responsibility to write history of our conservatory, to write history of our music. So a lot of things should be done by us, not by any Europeans. And if we delegate it to Russian scholars, as it was before, or somehow, it's we will have the situation will repeat. So we should somehow change its inside, not to have this new repeatings. So for me, it's the main thing, and I am really grateful to Yulia for this question, and to Slava for this metaphor about monuments to big monuments to Putin. Yeah, it's not funny maybe, but it's in some point it's true. It's true. Yeah. Thank you.
But I want to quickly catch this thought before everyone thinks we want to have a monument of Putin, and remind everyone that there was the Maidan and there was Orange Revolution, and prior that there were failed attempts of this kind of things. And we know that we're not special people that are able to kind of fight hurricanes. We just learn through long process of gathering together, then getting failed, then getting disappointed, cynical, then gathering together again, learning our lessons, fighting again, then getting disappointed, getting cynical, then gathering together again, over and over and over. And that's what I meant, that humanity is capable of this. It's a learning process. It's not like just something that happens. It's a long process. So putting aside, this is like really the internal process that has a lot of failures as part of the learning process. And this didn't come out of nowhere, but we did really like gather together again. We knew how to do it, and we just kept like doing everyone whatever is possible to do.
I
have one quick sentence, just one.
Sure, Yulia. I just wanted to say something, that this was probably the most kind of optimistic thought that anyone has given me in a really long time, because I'm so deep into the cynicism, and to know that there can be another wave, and there can be another push after the cynicism sets in.
I have an even more optimistic thing to add to that. Well, sorry, it's not a competition, but I think I was just so inspired, Olga, by what you said, because the thing is that, you know, very often these ongoing, there are certain perceptions that get sometimes thrown at people who constantly redo things, that, you know, that it's some sort of weakness. I think it is a strength. If you're capable of learning from your mistakes, if people are capable of reflecting on what they're doing and approach things in a very dynamic way, of course, there will be some confrontations, and there will be skepticism, and there will be apathy, but the kind of being willing, but not just willing, being able to reflect on those and come back from those mistakes and take something positive out of them, what you don't need anymore, throwing away, that there is a big strength in that. Structures and visions and analysis that are impervious to self-reflection are the ones that are consigned to cobwebs of history. We see that on, you know, we started talking about some left analysis that are not fit for present day. That's a perfect example of that. Right? There is an analysis for every concrete situation, and being able to recognize that what you knew before may not work for you anymore. There is a lot of strength in that. And Ukrainians have that. They've learned it the hard way. And it's amazing. And I think with that sort of realization, finding strength, there is a lot of strength to be found in it. And there is a lot of hope that I see in that as well.
Absolutely. And I think this is also a very, yes, in a way, another perspective to try and impose on the way the resistance is presented, and the way, Ukrainian struggle is kind of sensationalized and isolated from the rest of humanity. It is humanity's struggle in the sense of, this is what we're all capable of if we learn and if we continue to gather together. It has just gone past midnight over in Kyiv, and it's very late for everyone. I am eternally grateful for you for joining us. Also, you have lots of love, as all the panelists from our audience, from Vladislav, and I'm going to let you catch some sleep. Hopefully, this has been recorded. It will be online. People will be able to watch it, and we would definitely encourage them to do so, because I found it a very illuminating and kind of inspiring conversation. I hope it was a good use of your time, and it will be, I'm sure, not the last time we see each other. Thank you for all the helpful framings and concepts. Thank you for your energy and for your patience as well. Thank you, Chris, for gathering us together. And to everyone else, please continue to support Ukraine Solidarity Campaign, other solidarity initiatives, and we will see you soon. Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
you.
This was amazing. And thank you for staying up late and, you know, finding the strength to have these conversations amidst the horror that the last year has been. So thank you.